Hello and welcome everyone. We are so delighted to have you with us this afternoon. I hope you're all comfortable, got a nice cup of tea or coffee with you, and we're really looking forward to taking you through the next hour or so. So I'm hoping that we've got several attendees from the previous two sessions, but if you are not, if you're new to us, welcome to the last webinar in our three-part series, which has been specifically designed for the education sector. And it's all about income generation opportunities and ways to engage with your community through facility settings. So like I say, delighted to have you. I'm going to just talk through for a couple of minutes to allow other people to also join us and settle in before I hand over to our speaker. So I will introduce myself. I'm Beth. I'm from Oaks Consultancy, and Oaks have been absolutely thrilled to deliver this series in partnership with our good friends Not Sport, who you'll be hearing from today, and Lifestyle Fitness. So we kicked off the series with my colleague Katie from Oaks presenting on how to maximise your lettings and management opportunities. Think about the income generation pathways. Then last week, Lifestyle Fitness actually explored how to really develop those facilities into a really profitable commercial opportunity, and of course enhance the health and well-being of all the students and staff and the community around you that would be enjoying them. So details of how to watch back those recordings will be shared after this event as well, after this webinar. And of course, this one's being recorded too, so you'll have the full suite to watch back at your leisure or share with colleagues. And hopefully, we very much hope spark some really interesting conversations within your schools and academies. And obviously, we will be on hand to answer any further questions that come from those discussions. But back to today. So today is the turn of Not Sport to provide their insight. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. Not Sport are leaders in design, procurement and project management sports pitches, and they have worked with hundreds of trusts, academies, schools, universities and sports club alike to develop artificial turf, sport, play and cricket schemes. So your speaker today, as I said, is Duncan Bennett, who's the Managing Director at Not Sport. And Duncan leads on the sports pitch side and has nearly 20 years experience of all different types of schemes, from single-use multi-court, single court multi-use games areas, and of course their hockey pitches, independent schools, and everything that I listed in between. Lots of different facilities he's looked over the past years. And as well as working on specific projects, Duncan sits on industry technical committees both in the UK and Europe, and works with national and international governing bodies on facility design and development strategies and planning. So on that note, I think I'm leaving you in very, very capable hands to explore the opportunity that you might wish to consider. So Duncan, I am delighted to hand over to you.
Thanks, Beth. That's a fantastic introduction, almost as if I'd written it myself. Much appreciated. The thing to add to that introduction is that unfortunately I've woke up with a bit of a sore throat today, so I'm hoping that my voice holds all the way through for the next hour. If it doesn't, then I don't know. I'll use a medium of mime or modern dance or something to try and get us through to the end. I'm sure it will be all right though. So today's presentation is designed to give everybody on the webinar an understanding of the situation and the scenario that faces us with regards to funding, specifically for sport. So Beth mentioned that we cover projects for sport, play and cricket and recreation. Today's presentation is really focused on the sports side of things. Obviously, if you want to talk to us about anything specific, you can do so afterwards through the Q&A or get in touch direct. So yeah, the story of the presentation should get you from an understanding of how Not Sport work, our background, the current state of funding for sport in the UK, ways that we see things moving in the future, and how that can be rationalised to form a plan for your specific scheme, and then ways that we can help if and as all that sounds of interest to you. So we'll crack on and see how we go along. So Not Sport, I mentioned we'd do a bit of background. It's only a short sort of section, just a bit about us. We've been around for 37 years, as Beth touched on. I lead on the sports pitch side of things. And as a company, we have 4 customer facing, if we call it that, departments: sport, play and cricket. And we also have an export division that takes some of the innovative design solutions out to, I think at last count, something like 30 odd countries around the world, mainly Europe and North America, but also further afield into the Far East and elsewhere. In 37 years, we've seen probably as many different types of projects across those different areas as you could wish to imagine. So we are in a great position to offer that support, advice and experience to your project. And we're committed to providing effective and innovative design solutions each and every time. So we don't have an off-the-shelf pitched project that we put forward on every project. We design each project to suit the individual requirements of the school or the club or the various stakeholders involved, something we'll touch on in the slides to come, actually. Again, as some hopefully reassurance, we're official partners to various governing bodies, England Hockey being probably the flagship one, along with the FIH, who is the International Hockey Federation. We're also an ECB Code of Practice approved system supplier. And we also, which again, something we'll touch on, offer an option for schools in particular, the education sector, I suppose generally, a way of spreading the cost of a project over a period of up to 7 years. So we're the only independent company, as it stands today, that can offer that proven delivery option if and as it suits the funding and the financial plan that's in place for the project that you're looking at. So that's something to consider, and we'll touch on that as we go through. So some slides just with some of those accreditations for you, the various badges we've got. Obviously, we're very proud of these, having worked hard to get them. So you can see the hockey ones in front of you. We don't just do hockey, we do all types of synthetic turf pitches. I mentioned cricket. So if you're looking at cricket facilities, we have pitch systems, we have practice facilities like the illustration, the photo there shows from the National Centre in Ireland. We also do playgrounds. So all around the world, we do playground surfacing in parks and recreational areas. Probably the flagship customer we've got in the UK is Glasgow City Council, with whom we've had a contract since 1991. And we also have a flagship customer in Central Park, Manhattan, famous obviously New York Park. The Central Park Conservancy use us on all their playgrounds in their park as well. So it's a great option for you to consider if you're looking at playground projects as well. We're also a SAPCA member, which is our industry body, the Sport and Play Construction Association. And we've recently joined as the first commercial member of the British Association for Sustainability in Sport, BASIS. And sustainability is something that, again, we'll touch on in the presentation, but is forming part of a really strong narrative running through our industry, and something that we definitely advocates of, both in design and in economic sustainability. Again, something we'll touch on in the course of the presentation. So that's us. You know, we think we sit quite well and offer some good services and solutions, and got a range of experience and expertise that we can pass on to you about your projects. But why should we care about the funding of sports facilities specifically? Well, this quote is one that we use quite a bit in day-to-day meetings, because about a year ago, I went to see an academy in the Northwest, and the business manager there made the point, very salient point, that a sports facility that generates income through lettings, evenings and weekends, is the only investment that she can make, or an academy can make, that can generate an income, and often a significant surplus income of, in a project, it was around £40,000, that then each year can be invested into other areas of her estate, whether that be in additional sports facilities or in repairing the science block roof or a new boiler or whatever it might be. That is the only type of investment that can generate surplus income to support the wider strategy and investment the academy wanted to make. And I thought that, you know, it was a great point to make, and something therefore that changes how a sports project can be viewed within an organisation like an academy or a trust, because it can be an income generator. The other reasons that we often talk about funding is that it's the single biggest reason why projects don't happen. So as designers, as project managers, acting as planning agents, we can typically overcome any physical impediment to a project in to design mitigation. If you've got a poor site, we can strengthen the subgrade, we can incorporate stabilisation solutions, we can get you through planning by using new modern lighting technology or acoustic fencing if there's residents close by. So we can overcome typical project hurdles, but the most difficult thing to overcome, and the reason that most projects don't go ahead, is because there isn't sufficient capital funds available to invest in a sports pitch. A new build hockey pitch is going to cost at least £500,000 typically. A new build 3G pitch, full size, 106 by 70 to comply with the FA requirements, is going to cost £600,000 plus. So this is huge investment. And unfortunately, as the first bullet point highlights there, traditional grant aid is shrinking. It has shrank. I started in the sports industry in the early 2000s, and the big lottery fund was signing off checks for projects, you know, £500,000 at a time. Those days have gone. And being honest, it's almost certain they're not going to come back. Not in my lifetime or any short period of time at the moment. And then post-pandemic, here's the voice going. Post-pandemic, I think it's reasonable to also ask the question whether sport will continue to be subsidised by government. So one argument that some in the culture side of the world, cinema, theatre, do ask the question why government through Sport England funds sports pitches and resurfacing of sports pitches. Surely the pitch should be able to pay for itself just as much as a cultural asset should. And I think that conversation will be even tougher to address post-pandemic as government budgets get stretched and obviously everything that's been paid out for has to be repaid. And ultimately that means the final point sort of is relevant, which is if there's fewer grants, then in our view, and probably gathering momentum generally across the industry and elsewhere, the only option is for sports pitches to basically be sustainable. And we need to, as an industry and with you as customers, hopefully develop economically sustainable business models so that you can see that the pitch isn't a risk, it's an investment that, like that business manager in the Northwest thought, can generate income that can pay for the facility over the life of the facility, not just in the first sort of 4 or 5 years, that you can create a sinking fund, but that you've still got surplus income, hopefully, that you can invest in elsewhere. So this is the sort of model that we're moving to now, rather than just trying to find £500,000 worth of funding for a pitch in a field at a school and then walking off site and coming back in 10 years and looking for a resurface. We're trying to create sustainable solutions each and every time. And we've tried to encapsulate that in this sort of cycle. We did a webinar with the FIH on economically sustainable hockey pitches, and we came in with it for that. And it seems to, again, sort of be relevant here. And just as we said on that webinar a few weeks ago, you may well, as a customer, have to go around this cycle more than once. This is hard and often long processes to secure the level of funding and create a sustainable business case that you're confident with before you can proceed with the actual build phase. So our job is to help you develop what is ultimately a sustainable business plan. In order for you to do that, we need to consider with you the current and future legislation that's coming in for sports pitches. That might be design and performance standards. It might be environmental legislation that's going to impact on how you deal with surface water runoff or drainage or base construction or whatever it may be. That may mean that we have to consider innovation and new ways of building pitches and new products. But interestingly, that might open the door to different types of grants and funding support, which then in turn leads to perhaps considering different types of sustainable design, which informs the project cost, because innovation sometimes costs more than traditional builds, sometimes it doesn't. And then that informs the business plan. And then we have to consider what that looks like so we can, go around the cycle again if and as needed. But we want to consider all of these elements within the development of your project so that you can make the informed choice as to what's right for you. And if there's ways and means that can open up doors to different grant conversations, fantastic. So that is designed to give you a sort of snapshot as to why it's important that we consider funding, but not just as an isolated item in the development of a project, actually how it links to everything that we're trying to do to get you from a greenfield site to an artificial turf pitch compliant for hockey or football or rugby or whatever it may be. So what's the current situation regarding grant aid? Well, I'm not the bearer of good news on this, I'm afraid. It's not good, and it's not getting better. So yeah, you might suddenly see all the attendee numbers drop off the edge of a cliff now. I've said that, but that is the reality of the situation, and it'd be remiss of me or anybody else to suggest otherwise. So just going through some of the sort of traditional funders, if you like, that give grants towards projects. Sport England, probably one of the best known, if not the best known funder of sports facilities. They are class themselves now as funder of last resort. So they want to put the final element of funding towards a project to get it over a line, with you as the customer having secured funding from wherever else before you go to Sport England. So before you darken their door with a funding application, it's almost imperative that you can demonstrate to them you've tried every single other avenue to funding, and you're going to them as the funder of last resort, rather than the key stakeholder funder that is going to pull in everything else. And the reason for that is the sort of bottom point, really. The average grant that they're awarding to synthetic turf sports projects is about 40 to 50k. So if you're looking at a £500,000 hockey pitch, for an example, it's not it's a good size sum, but it's not a sum that's going to suddenly make or break a project. It's part of the solution, and that's very much where Sport England see themselves. And by the way, what I should make clear is this is me explaining how I see things with Sport England based on presentations they've given. I'm not sort of speaking verbatim on their behalf here. And then the middle 2 points are quite salient as well. So gone are the days where Sport England would typically give grants out if you could demonstrate that your project would increase hockey participation or football participation by 10%. It's a part of the story, it's still of interest, but really Sport England's goal, as dictated to by government, is to get inactive people active and therefore reduce the burden on the NHS. And I think those two things will be interesting to follow on, because obviously post-pandemic, there's been an increased attention put on the health and well-being of individuals and communities collectively. And therefore, there may be some funding coming in down the chain, I suppose, in a few years' time, trying to get inactive people active. Now, that might, on the face of it, not sound like it's going to be relevant to a sports pitch project, but if you can incorporate, for example, walking football, walking hockey, walking rugby these days, walking everything, to be fair, if you can get boot camps on there, if you can link to NHS outreach programs for diabetes groups and people that, as I say, currently aren't active, then you are starting to create those key stakeholder links and community links that will create a really comprehensive plan. And in doing so, hopefully you'll be able to demonstrate to Sport England and others that it's not just a pitch for football or hockey, it's actually a pitch for anybody, and that you're going to engage with community to get inactive people active, reduce the burden on NHS, as well as deliver on sports strategic goals for a governing body like football or hockey or whatever it may be. So in a nutshell, Sport England at the moment, they aren't handing out grants at hundreds of £1,000s at a time. On average, it's smallish grants in the grand scheme of things, but still sizable and worth having, contributing towards the overall project cost. National governing bodies. So the overview of this is that until about 4 years ago, each national governing body were allocated capital investment fund from Sport England's coffers. So hockey would have been given X amount of money for 4 years to invest in facilities, but that was money from Sport England. That model changed 4 years ago, and Sport England are now the gatekeeper to all funds. So governing bodies don't have that capital investment fund anymore. So where the likes of the Football Foundation, Football Association, and sort of linked, can offer grants, that's not directly through exchequer funding from government. It's through money they've generated through TV rights, commercial activities, etc. Which is why football is still the biggest funder of sports pitches and projects, and they might match fund up to 50%. But it is specific for football, obviously. That's for a football pitch, and definitely worth investigating. I mean, all these are going to be worth considering in and around your business plan. The England and Wales Cricket Board, the ECB, they have grants for facilities, interest-free loans as well, as do the RFU, have interest-free loans, as well as capital programs that aren't currently in place, but maybe will be in the years to come. The LTA, they also have grants and interest-free loans. The Rugby League have World Cup 2021 capital grants. So if you've got a rugby league type project, or you think you can link to a rugby league club, then that might be an option. But as you can see, I mean, these funds, with the exception of the Football Foundation, they aren't going to be for the entire project cost, and the Football Foundation's 50%. Sometimes it is slightly more, but typically you've still got to find 50% of the project cost yourself. They'll only fund if you can match their 50%. And again, I go back, it's, you know, £600,000 plus for a football pitch full size. So effectively, you're required to find £300,000 to make the business case sing for the Football Foundation to match it. So it is tough, and we make no bones about it. So aside from governing bodies, Sport England, what other types of funding is available? This does vary geographically, but one way that we see quite a lot of funding towards sports pitches these days is from local authorities through Section 106, sometimes abbreviated to S106, also sometimes called Community Infrastructure Levy, SIL funding. So Section 106, SIL funding is derived from housing developer contributions that is ring-fenced for community sport, play and recreational projects. Now, some local authorities are very active on this, and they will be looking to deliver strategically important projects using this money. So Robert Smythe Academy in Market Harborough, which was a hockey pitch we delivered and just handed it over recently, also encompassed new tarmac courts, incorporated some Sport England funding to the sort of sums that we've already gone through. It got £375,000+ from Section 106 funding, and it also got some local charitable funding, and the trust involved also invested some of their funding. So this is an example of where you can get some significant chunks of money that might be a way of match funding the FA's 50%, may not, or it might be an anchor grant that allows you to go and top up with smaller grants from charities, Sport England, your own capital reserves, or whatever it may be. So Section 106 monies can be quite significant and important. If your area's had housing developments in the past 5 to 10 years, you might have to challenge your local authorities to find out what their Section 106 balance is, but it's a way of accessing funding for community sport, play and recreation. And obviously, if you're a school, you would have to make the facility available outside of school time to justify the local authority investment, as you would for pretty much every external grant. Now, what's important to note on this is, like at Robert Smythe, that project in Market Harborough was identified within the Harborough District Council play and pitch strategy. So one key thing, again, that is increasingly important is that if you've got a project or your site is named within the local play and pitch strategy as being somewhere a sports pitch might be constructed, that is a key important step in demonstrating to Sport England, Section 106 funders, etc., that your project is viable, it's important. If you're not in the play and pitch strategy, it doesn't mean you can't get funding, it just makes it that little bit harder. So Robert Smythe, their site was identified for a hockey pitch, and then so therefore it's signed off by that district council and the councillors involved, and therefore it was not unreasonable to approach them to make a contribution to delivering what was a strategic, policy-driven project. Hopefully that makes some degree of sense. So Section 106 money is definitely worth exploring. Depending on where you are in the country, there might be nothing, there might be lots, there might be anything in between, but it's definitely worth a conversation. So here is the pitch at Robert Smythe. You can see on the picture there, RSA in cones at the bottom. It's just been handed over, so that there's a sand dress pitch. The sand levels on handover are a little bit higher because it takes a little bit of time for them to drop in. And you can see the tarmac courts at the back that I think next week are going to be coated in 2 different colours, and that's going to be used by local tennis and netball teams alike. And the hockey pitches, the anchor tenant there is the Market Harborough Hockey Club. We're obviously delighted to get that pitch because it meets all their strategic requirements for the short, medium and longer term. And then beyond 106, other types of funding, again, I'll whiz through these. Local charities grants, I've mentioned them already. Sometimes they are perhaps only going to cover an amount that might be for the sports equipment, the goals. So when it says goals there, I don't mean goals soccer centres, I mean the physical goals with nets and posts and stuff. So quite often there are smaller pots that you can get that can cover the cost of an element of the project, like sports equipment, maintenance equipment, whatever it may be. That will be specific to your local area, of course. I'll come back to social funding in a minute. National Lottery, again, they still have some programs out there for smallish contributions. Again, it might be towards goals or a specific part of the project linked to a community group or something around that. Huge amount of importance is placed on your own funds. If you have any towards it, that is always a big tick for external grant aid providers like the Foundation, Football Foundation, Sport England, etc. They do expect some level of contribution from you if they're being asked to contribute their own cheque of funding and grants towards your project. And that means that quite often it's a case of working very hard to fundraise. We've got some great examples, I won't go through specifically now, but of schools and others that have raised quite significant amounts of sums in quite innovative ways in some cases in their local area. For some schools, that's linking with sports clubs and doing joint fundraising activities and initiatives and innovation. In some cases, it's been the school themselves doing summer balls and auctioning off certain parts of the pitch, or literally picking up the phone to every single local business they can think of to see if they'd contribute £500 or whatever it might be. And there's also non-traditional funding. Charity Bank, somebody that if you're a charity is worth looking into. And we've also got, as I mentioned right at the start, a funding option that we call fast track funding, and we'll touch on that in a minute towards the end of the presentation, just to give you a flavour of how that can work. Going back up towards the second point, social funding. So this is an interesting one, and I'll be honest, at the moment it's something that we are getting into without being able to talk with authority about it. That's probably the best way of putting it. So we can introduce you to people that are very, very involved with social funding. And the reason that this could be of interest to you if you're looking to fundraise a sports pitch project is we've already sort of established, even by now, traditional funding for sport is shrinking. It's not really there, if I'm honest. But social funding is quite sizable in comparison to sports funding. And if we can demonstrate on your project, we can link your scheme to community strategy, to outreach programs, to local NHS programs, even police have community outreach programs. That may mean that you can access social funding, which just by, in the UK issued by government, it just dwarfs sports funding. So we'd only need a small percentage of that as an industry to make quite a big change to what we can do and deliver from a funding point of view to customers such as yourselves. So this is a newish area to explore. Again, you can probably tell I don't have specific answers to give you as to how to go about doing it. We're working on a project by project basis with customers that can demonstrate those initial links, and then we can introduce you to people that are specialists in that area. And we can find out very quickly whether it's going to be viable or not. But we do see some areas of the country, particularly in deprived areas, where that is definitely going to be a way that funds and grants are going to be accessible and probably in reasonable sizes. So we've covered Sport England, governing bodies, other types of funding, Section 106, and also the ones we see here. And Garstang Community Academy is probably a great example, even more so than the Robert Smythe project in Market Harborough, where, again, being honest, there's probably pitches elsewhere in the country that have never been delivered that probably, I wouldn't say deserve, but have more strategic importance and therefore probably an easier route to delivery than Garstang had. What Garstang had was a very, very good link to Garstang Hockey Club, a very old and well-respected, quite famous hockey club in the Northwest. And it was the sheer willpower, endeavour, hard work of the fundraising manager at the academy and the business team at the academy that basically refused to take no for an answer until they had every single pound, shilling and pence that they could muster to deliver a full-size pitch at £550,000 with everything you see before you on that photo there. So this was a little bit of Sport England. It was a lot of internal fundraising and engagement with the business community to make contributions. There was a lot of hard work just getting doors slammed in their face, left, right and centre. And basically, as I say, that refusal to take no for an answer. And there's other projects that probably would be more deliverable than this one. It was the sheer sort of bloody mindedness, if you call it that, of the school that were determined to deliver the pitch that got them the funding, and ultimately won round the likes of Sport England to give them some funding, the local authority a bit of funding. But without their 3 to 4 years hard work in fundraising and getting some capital contributions together, it wouldn't have happened. So it was testament to the individuals involved at the school. And they were lucky in the sense that they had somebody that was dedicated to raising money for the school. And this was the key priority at the time that she worked on. So a great example of how you can deliver a project if you're able to access that local community spirit, drive and generate income through fundraising and all different types of things. There's a drone video of it. The sort of grey concrete to the top there is an element of the design that we future-proof for this school and the hockey club, so that they can drop in a couple of dugouts, team shelters if they wanted to, or even a mini spectator stand, depending on what funding they could arrive at. So it's an ongoing fundraising project as well, which is also something to point out. Very often we'll deliver the project, obviously with the usual infrastructure of paths and things that you can see to make sure it's usable, but there still might be phased funding raising to follow even after completion. Herts and Essex High School, again, another sort of multi-agency funded project. New build hockey pitch. There's also some tarmac courts to the right-hand side of the new sports centre that was funded separately. And this was a project that was funded through our fast track funding and other stakeholders for various individual elements. So Sport England contributed towards some lighting and the school contributed some capital funds. But by and large, this was delivered through a robust business plan set against our fast track funding model, which allowed the school to spread the cost of the project over a period of up to 7 years. So it becomes more bite-sized chunks that's affordable. And Bishop Stortford Hockey Club, with the anchor tenant guaranteeing a level of income for hockey that underpinned the business case. Something again we'll touch on in a minute. So Herts and Essex, I mentioned there, were that project was the single biggest fast track funding contribution towards a project we've done. We've got some others this year that will probably exceed that. But over £600,000 of that project, including the netball courts, was covered through our fast track funding. So what is that? It's basically a way for customers in the education sector to access funding towards a project as an alternative to what we've already said is a difficult, underfunded and oversubscribed grant solution or route. It's designed to be flexible. So I've said it's to allow you to spread the cost of over a period of up to 7 years. Sometimes that's 5, sometimes it's 3. Very often it is 7, just to create a robust business case. And it can be covered, can cover the entire project cost or the final £50,000 or half of it or whatever it may be, to create a coherent, as I say, business case and funding package. And the reason it works is that I mentioned right at the start that the business manager in the north of England said, if you're able to let the facility out to the community, evenings and weekends, to a reasonable degree, usually from 6 till 10 on Monday to Friday, and weekends for matches with a hockey club or a football club if it's a 3G pitch, you can generate quite substantial amounts of revenue through that community use. So what we do on nearly all projects, but pretty much every single fast track funding project, is find an anchor tenant for the pitch who will use it for 3 evenings a week for training, and then at weekends for match play. And if you can do that, then you're only filling in the Mondays and the Fridays, maybe a junior team or community groups, or five-side football if it was viable to do so. And very often we see pitches generating, full-size pitches, generating 70, 80, over £100,000 in some cases, particularly down in the south or east of England. Now, if you can generate that level of income through community lettings, then you're able to create a business case that would support something along the lines of fast track funding. And I go back to what I said right at the start. Our job isn't to just deliver the pitch, it's to make sure that we've considered everything so that there's a sustainable economic and business case attached to it, so that you, if you're representing a school, for example, don't feel like that you're presenting a risky project to governors for approval or whatever it may be. So we're doing this on a weekly basis with schools. We've got some full-size pitches being constructed at the moment with fast track funding in full, or with some capital contributions from trusts, or with a small amount of local funding. So it is designed there to give you a solution to consider that you might not be aware of already. And our job is to design that facility so that it suits you. If you're a school, for example, during the day, it does everything you want it to do curriculum-wise. But ultimately, it's also considered what the local demand is from those anchor tenants. And so it's going to meet their requirements as well. And effectively, it's there to use if you're in the education sector. It's been used for trusts, academies, independent schools, maintained schools, Catholic schools. So we've done about 40, I think we've got 47th project on site since we did it in 2013. And the first project we did in 2013 in Whitefield's school in Barnet has gone through the full funding, 7 years. And so we can demonstrate a complete cycle of the project. And if you're funding for 7 years, the pitches that we deliver are of a quality such that they'll last at least 10 and more often than not 12, 14 plus. So it's not as if at the end of the lease period you've got another project to deliver a resurface. There's going to be some period between the end of the lease and the resurface where all that income is for yourself. More often than not, schools are using the income to pay for the lease repayments. And it's important to note that this is done via an operating lease, which is why it complies with the ESFA regulations. And we work with partners who are specialists in operating leases and lease solutions in the education sector. And each and every scheme has to pass audit, has to go through your auditors. So again, this isn't a fag package solution on every project we've done, 47 and counting. It's gone through those checks and it's been signed off by the Secretary of State for Education twice. To demonstrate it's a true operating lease. So it's there to be used, it's being used in the education sector. If you're a club and you're thinking, this sounds great for me, and it's very difficult for clubs. Obviously, the state school sector, the education sector is deemed to be low risk. The amateur sports club sector is deemed to be high risk, rightly or wrongly. So it's not that you can't access it, but it is more difficult because you just don't have that low risk perception within the funding. And the funders of this are asset financing banks like Santander, Societe Generale, etc. So again, this isn't names that you've never heard of. These are kosher banking operations looking for low risk investments to get a return. And everything we see day to day in the sports papers, let alone in the amateur sector, demonstrates how difficult it can be for sports clubs to demonstrate that they're a profitable organisation. There are out there, don't get me wrong, there are some out there, and we'll be able to consider and discuss with you your specific scheme if you are a club, but it is going to be a lot more difficult than if you're a education sector customer. So how can Not Sport help? Well, so we've gone through everything. We have spoken about the fact that the grant aid situation isn't great. There are still options out there, but it's not going to be a magic check that's going to give you £500,000 towards a project. It's probably going to be multiple applications to access smaller grants. And ultimately, whichever way you look at it, you're going to be expected as the customer, as the recipient of any grant, to be in a position to match fund. And that might be 50%, which is obviously a sizable amount, or it might be that you just got to demonstrate that you've literally wrung dry everything that you can do in your local area, and yours is 30%. But nonetheless, it's all very, very unlikely, almost certain, that you'll struggle to get anybody to really invest in your project and provide grant aid support if you aren't willing to put a level of contribution together yourself. So what we do is come out and see you and basically assess your site. So you might have an existing pitch that needs to resurface, so we do a pitch condition survey. It might be a new build project like Herts and Essex and Robert Smythe, and we'll do that feasibility study to say, right, this is what you've currently got, this is what you're looking to achieve, these are the ways that you could go about doing that, and these are the capital costs of those options. Coupled with that, these are the development costs on a new build project, because you're going to have to get planning permission for it. And the impact of that on your site is XYZ. So from that first meeting, you'll get a really comprehensive feasibility report that will inform you as to how you can progress the project. Now, unfortunately, for some people, that's as far as the project goes, because it's not feasible. There isn't sufficient demand in the area for a pitch, and there isn't sufficient grants out there to cover the cost of the project, and there's no capital reserves to work with. But more often than not, there is something feasible there. I've said it already. We can typically design a pitch to suit your site, as long as you're not on the side of a cliff or in the middle of a swamp or something like that. Effectively, we can design a solution for you. The difficulty is getting that funding. So that's where we would then work with partners like Oaks and Lifestyle to see if there's a joined up sort of multi-commercial sort of approach that we can demonstrate to you to create that robust business plan, because that's what it's all about. The next 2 points are critical, whether it's us on our own, or indeed whether it's Oaks and Lifestyle, or all three of us, or any combination of the above. We want to get you to a position where you've got a business case that makes sense, or the other way of looking at it is challenge your assumptions to find out if the business case you've got in mind is actually realistic or not, because it's much better to find that out early and perhaps have to accept that it's not a viable scheme, or that it needs rationalisation in a different way. I'll come back to that in a minute. Than it is to deliver a project and then open the gates on day one and find out that nobody's turning up, and all that income that you'd expected is now a hole in the budget. And that rationalisation of the project, I said I'd come back to, is important, because sometimes we do go out to look at a new build scheme, full-sized football pitch or rugby pitch or whatever it may be. And actually, through this design consultancy, through working with partners like Oaks and Lifestyle, we can actually say, rather than the full-size pitch, why don't we do a smaller facility that's great for teaching, coaching, training, because there isn't a local demand at weekends for a competitive pitch. But you're going to get what you need as a school day to day, and the income might be less, but the capital costs are less. So maybe that's a better business case. And that might mean that then we consider, is there room for Lifestyle to look at sort of internal work with gyms and fitness suites and things like that. So all of these things need to be considered. And again, I repeat what I said right at the start. We don't want to be in a situation where perhaps our industry's been for a period of time, building a pitch in a field at a school because somebody wants it. We want to be in the situation where we've done that, partly because you want it, of course, but ultimately because you know that the business case, the finance plan over the life of the project is sustainable, and it's not going to leave you with a problem in 10, 12 years, because this leads on to a really important point as well, where we are seeing people get grants like Herts and Essex and Robert Smythe. Part of the grant conditions are that you don't go back to them in 10 years' time, pleading poverty and asking for money towards a resurface. So your grant is conditioned on the basis that you do have this business case. So this is where we work. This is the sort of world we operate in initially. And we're more than happy to talk to you about your project and come out, visit you, understand what you're looking to do, maybe challenge you a little bit, as I've said, on that, so that we can create a coherent feasibility report that, again, probably provides more questions than it does provide answers initially. But that's part of the process, so that by the time the project hopefully is deemed viable and trustees, governors sign it off, we know the detail behind it. And within that, it's also finding out where the local grant aid support may be, initially, probably make some assumptions, and then introducing conversations with national governing bodies and other funders, pointing them in the direction of customers like Garstang and others that have funded a project in a slightly different way, to see if some of their solutions and ways that they found work can be replicated at your particular project. So we'll facilitate all this, and when I do these presentations, it's sort of, I forget quite how much work we do at times. The average gestation of one of our projects, new build wise, is about 2 to 3 years. Very often it's 3 years. And very rarely is it less than 2 years. On the resurface, it's probably nearer 18 months than the full 3 years. So we, again, aren't just here to help you deliver a project this summer. By the way, great if you do want our help this summer, because it very rarely happens that quickly. But we're here to give you support all the way through the scheme. And that's because this is our sort of very hopefully simple description of how we work. That's because we are a single point of contact for you to go through the project with. So when we work with the customer, we'll go out and do that feasibility. That will hopefully lead to a decision that there is a viable scheme. And then we'll work with you as your planning agents to get you planning permission if it's needed, in combination with doing a design consultancy. So the planning and the design tend to go hand in hand. One informs the other, because if the planners say that they want a particular type of lighting, for example, that would inform the design, which informs the budget. So all this is sort of part of the process, if you like, the journey, to use that word, oft overused, to get you to a point where you've got all the necessary external consents in place from a funding, from a planning point of view. And then we can go into the second half of the design specification stage, part 2, which is putting it out to tender. So not Sport Art contractor, we're not a manufacturer. We put together projects, as I've described, and I'm describing at the moment, specific for your requirements, and then invite the construction sector to tender competitively for the right to build whatever we, with you as a customer, have agreed is right for your specific project. We then evaluate those tenders. You choose which contractor you want to appoint to build the contract. We do post-tender interviews and things like that, if necessary, tender analysis. But ultimately, you will hopefully choose one of the contractors to build the pitch, and then we oversee the entire project construction phase. So we're not on site every day, but we're there on average weekly minimum, doing key stage inspections. I'll come back to that again in a minute. Contract administration, CDM management of the health and safety side of things, quality control, everything you're going to need to make sure that you're not left with a contractor building the pitch wondering if they're doing it right. We make sure that at every stage they're using the right materials with the right processes and achieving the right standards. And I mentioned key stage inspections. So to achieve the right standards, there's now, I think on the new build pitch we're doing in St Albans at the moment, there's 27 individual key stage inspections that we do as a business. We got specialists from the construction sector in-house that go out and check the work that the contractors are doing to ensure that they conform and meet the specification and the industry requirements. So there's 27 individual of those on a new build project. So we're there checking that work to make sure it's all right, so that that long-term investment lasts a long time. And that will hopefully get us to a point where it's handed over, it's met all the specification requirements, the contractor's been paid, and we're still there through the life of the pitch. So my colleagues Matthew and Will very often go out and do ongoing condition reports, surveys, offer ongoing maintenance advice, evaluation and support. So we're a point of contact from having just a dream that you want to do a pitch all the way through to delivery and beyond, all the way through the life of the facility. So in summary, yeah, I'm not the bearer of good news on grant aid. I accept that, but probably better to be honest than tell you anything otherwise. You're going to need a compelling story as to why you should receive grant aid. It's oversubscribed, it's underfunded, it's very, very difficult to stand out when Sport England, for example, at least pre-pandemic, we're getting 50 applications for their grants a week. So you've got to have a compelling story as to why yours is going to get funding above the other 49 that they've had that week. At one stage, it was even more than that, I think. Your scheme will need, effectively, if you're going to go to traditional grant aid, it will need to be of what we call strategic importance. If your project or your site is identified within a local playing pitch strategy, that's brilliant. That's sort of a great step one, because that at least means that it's been deemed to be strategically important and the local authority have signed off on that document. If you don't know what a playing pitch strategy is, or you wonder where your local playing pitch strategy is, the best thing to do is to Google your local authority name. So around here, say Blaby District Council, and playing pitch strategy. Simple as that. There should be, not always there is, there should be a playing pitch strategy document that you can go onto. It might be out of date, it might be being renewed, but every local authority should have a playing pitch strategy. Pause. Unfortunately, not every single one does, but more often than not they do. So that's a great starting point. You can see if your school, if your sports club's named in there, and indeed where the local authority is sort of saying there's a deficit in 3G or hockey pitches or wherever it is, so you can understand what they're looking to deliver. If you are in there, or if indeed you're not in there as a specific site, but there's an identified shortage of 3G for football or hockey pitches or whatever it may be, then that's still a way that you can offer up your site to the local authority to say, okay, well, you've said in your playing pitch strategy there's a shortage of these pitches. Although we aren't named in there, we have space. This is what we're looking to do. Are you interested? And that can then link to the conversations about Section 106, Sport England conversations. And again, we can facilitate all this on your behalf. Ultimately, though, summary section, this is probably one of the most important things to take away today. If you're looking to access grant support, sport is only a part of the solution. It's almost certainly not going to be the sole solution. So how can your project link into different non-sporting organisations in many cases to demonstrate how you're going to get inactive people active and relieve that burden on the NHS, which is the driving force for most local authorities. And again, this is, I actually think, a real positive thing that we're challenging customers to do. We're being asked to challenge you to do, I should say. Because in reality, we can build the best hockey pitch, like at Robert Smythe, fantastic hockey pitch of a really high quality. And if you're overlooking that pitch and haven't played hockey for 30 years, it's extremely unlikely you're going to open your curtains on the day it's completed and go, brilliant, this is the moment I've been waiting for. That is going to get me out. I'm going to start playing hockey again. If you've not done exercise for 30 years or whatever it might be, you're going to need a way to get active before you start picking up a hockey stick. So this is all about creating pathways from inactivity to playing sport. So sport is a part, it's the end goal. In some ways, I suppose you could argue, is how you get those people active in the first place and then create pathways so they can start doing walking hockey or full hockey, whatever it may be. Consider innovative ways to fundraise. Absolutely. Yeah, we're in a situation where there isn't a lot of funding out there. So innovative ways to fundraise is key. Again, we've got some examples we can give you from other projects and introduce you to talk to people that have done it themselves, like a Garstang, etc. But it's engaging with the community, so you get that full buy-in, engaging with business, so that, yeah, they might pay £500 each to have a name on a plaque as a contributor towards the project. But, if you can get 20 or 30 businesses to pay £500, it adds up quite quickly. Consider non-traditional funding. We mentioned Charity Bank. I've gone through fast track funding up to a point as well, because does a business case exist where you can deliver a project without any capital contribution and then use the income generated from the pitch to cover the repayments back? The answer in many cases is you can. So maybe challenge us on that and see if we can come to your site and demonstrate if it's possible for you. What we won't do is dress up the figures to pretend it will work, knowing it won't. So it goes back to that sustainable sort of business model we want to present. But it's definitely an option to consider. Ultimately, though, a successful solution is likely to be a combination of all of the above, or certainly a consideration of all the above, and then a combination of some. And I go back to that point, that robust long-term business plan is critical. A, because you're going to have to demonstrate that to secure any grants anyway, but B, for your own reassurance. But very often we can do that and demonstrate there's additional income that you can use elsewhere within a school or within your trust. And that ultimately means, yeah, call back to the cycle we sort of started with, really. You may have to go through this cycle a number of different times, leap from one bit to another, maybe here and there. But to create a sustainable business plan, you've got to know what you're able to do now and in the future, which will inform the design. That might mean we consider innovation. It might open doors to different types of grant aid support in the months and years to come. It's all about sustainable design, or it should be. So that might mean that the project cost is reconsidered as a result of new products, innovation, sustainability. But that will inform a sustainable business plan so that you can make the informed decision that everything's right for you. And because we're working on a project typically for 3 years, the record is 9, by the way, 9 years gestation. So yeah, we don't need a challenge to try and break that, but we're here, but for that 3 years on average. So that does mean things change. So that might mean we have to consider the future, current and future legislation again, as the project gathers momentum towards construction. So we're here to assess all that, know what we can offer you at each stage, so that again you can make that informed decision and take a sustainable business case forward of whatever that might look like specific for your site, so that it's right for you as the individual customer. And that, as my voice just about holds up, is the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Duncan. Just about. We were very pleased to have a largely strong voice throughout, occasional croak, but thank you so much, considering you weren't feeling 100%. We really appreciate the journey you just took us on there. Absolutely open it out to anybody who wants to pop in a question into the chat function. We'll pick it up now, or of course we'll pick it up offline if we run out of time. But I'm going to kick off with a little bit of a question I think that's sprung to my mind, is just really the considerations around any sort of upfront costs, just things that, you know, people need to be aware of, I think, before really embarking on a business case for doing this.
Yeah, great question. So I sort of touched on it without going into any great depth. So I mentioned capital cost. So that is typically what your grants are there to cover. What we do on each and every scheme is also that initial feasibility to identify what the development costs are going to be. So if I understood the question correctly, there will be things like planning application fees. There is likely to be, for a new build project, pre-application fees and different consultation surveys. So if we're going to design a pitch that's 7,000 square meters in size, we need to know the ground conditions. So we need to know that there's been a ground investigation, a drainage design. So all these things add up in cost if you don't have them to hand. And typically, what I sort of say, that development cost, that running cost, to get you to a point where you can physically build, it's going to be on average 10 to 15,000 pounds. If you're in the middle of a area of natural beauty or a conservation area, it might even get up to 20,000 pounds because you're going to need additional surveys. But yeah, that's the sort of investment you probably need to consider making or having the funds to pay for, because you won't, it's very unlikely anyway, you'll get grants or anybody to fund those startup costs, if that makes sense.
Of course, yeah, completely expected. So we've got the planning, we're all going ahead, very excited, but what's probably the best pitch or the best setup, in your opinion, to really commercialize and bring in that revenue?
Yeah, so I think broadly speaking, there's a premium that people will pay for a fee for quality 3G pitch. So I'll caveat this in a second heavily, but the perception is that people will pay more per hour for a half pitch or a third of a pitch or a full pitch indeed, if it's got a modern third generation football specific surface, or rugby as well. And therefore, although it's slightly more expensive, you can create a better income generation from that type of pitch. What's interesting is that it really depends where you are in the country, because as the FA have rolled out a fantastic program of projects through the Football Foundation, in some parts of the country, we're getting close to a saturation point. So actually putting in another 3G pitch might not generate the income you think it may, And that's why I go back to one of the points I made on the slide earlier, which is that engagement with governing bodies to find out what strategically they have a demand for in the area is key. Because if you're looking to do a 3G pitch, but the demand is actually for a hockey pitch, either you need to change your design and your pitch expectations, or the thing isn't going to work. So that is a key thing. And again, a point of interest, hopefully, is England Netball, the LTA, Lawn Tennis Association, and England Hockey have launched a joint concept for pitches called Gen 2. So that rather than a hockey pitch only being possible for hockey, it's actually compliant for tennis and netball as well. So that rather than considering one sport or engaging with one club, you can engage with tennis clubs, netball clubs, a bit like we showed on some of the slides earlier. So I would say, broadly speaking, 3G will generate the most income. And if that's right in your area, that's obviously going to be the best business case, but it does vary depending on what your local demand is.
Of course. Thank you. It was really interesting to see them working collaboratively like that to make things a little bit easier.
That's right.
So we've discussed it in all of these webinars. We have to ask you the COVID recovery, which we're all very excited to come out of the other side of. But have you seen, or are you aware of anything sort of specific around sports funding to help kickstart and allow people to move forward, provide something like this?
I can give a one-word answer. No, not for facilities. No, there's obviously COVID grants to get people back playing on facilities, and there's been some grants to improve, for example, natural turf. I think there've been some grants out there to try and get natural turf back up and to a quality, because they've been left dormant for a period of time.
Of course, yeah.
But I don't think, as far as I'm aware anyway, there's any grants specific for facility development that exist, nor that we're expecting to see.
Absolutely. So I suppose really sort of a closing question, so as we bring this to a wrap, what do you think of the long term, the prospects long term around funding? How should we be planning for the next sort of 3-5 years?
Yeah, good question. I honestly think that probably the days of traditional grant aid and what people perhaps coming into this webinar and elsewhere are sort of sat thinking through as being the way to grant fund a project, I think largely they're gone. I think we're not going to go back to, as I say, mid 2000s, early 2000s, where big lottery fund were handing out checks to schools for £500,000 to deliver a pitch. That those days have gone. I think what we might start to see is grants to, in our world, facilities that embrace innovation in terms of sustainability, environmental benefits, social impact. I think that is the way that people will start, the customers will start to access decent sized grants. So I don't think it will be, if I build my pitch and I increase hockey participation by 10%, I'm going to get £100,000 from someone. I do think those days have gone. It's part of the story, as I keep saying. I think it's going to be, my project is going to be designed in a way that uses sustainable products, that carbon neutral, decarbonisation, maybe grants, things like that. And that's where in capital investment will come from, which is a completely different way of thinking about how you fund a project to perhaps how everything's been for the last, certainly in my time, 20 years in the industry. So that's the challenge. That's something we're willing to embrace and we're trying to do at the moment. And I think it'll only go further down that route across sustainability, social, and environmental grants.
Thank you, Duncan. Thank you so much for sharing all of your experience crammed into an hour. But we've got a huge amount of information back from you, so we really appreciate it. Obviously your details are on the screen, but as I said at the beginning, we will be following up with everyone, so you've got full information about Oaks Lifestyle Fitness and Not Sport, how to follow up with us and how to access all the videos, and really do get in touch with us. We're so here to help, to learn from you as much as we want you to learn from us. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you with us at one or all three of the series that we've hosted, and we will definitely be back with more in due course, because we really enjoy working together and we enjoy having everyone on board to share our advice. Duncan, thank you. And
Thanks,
everyone, thank you. Have a wonderful afternoon. It's been a pleasure to have you with us.